The real estate market is getting worse every single month, and one area that it is showing up big time is in the builders. The builders are getting very desperate, and this could mean a lot to you if you're a seller thinking of selling this year or next year, or if you're looking to buy and if you want to negotiate. But overall, if you want real estate information on how the market is changing on the ground, listen to this episode today. We have some incredible data points that might surprise you, and wait till the end to figure out what's going on with the consumer as well. So this is all about builder desperation. And here's a chart that came out from Reventure Consulting. It's regarding new home prices that have been declining since 2022. This is from Lennar. This is the source of SEC filings. You can see at the peak, they were selling Lennar properties, new construction homes, for $491,000, which is a crazy number to think of. But if you remember back to this period of time, there were rates down in the twos and in the threes. And since that peak in about 2022, October 2022, we have seen prices decline all the way down to $383,000. That's a 22% decline in sales price. This is net of incentives. So the incentives are closing costs to buy down your interest rate. And by the way, there's so much more distress just behind not just Lennar, but other builders, especially here in the South, where prices are now coming down and migration is down about 80% from the peak in 2022. Ultimately, the builders are getting absolutely desperate and going way below pre 2020 numbers. And here's an article that just came out the other day. Interest rates cut by the Federal Reserve today. This is an ad that came out by Lennar. It says rates dropped. Big news. The Federal Reserve cuts interest rates for the first time in 9 months. This is the best time to buy. Home prices may rise fast. Well, ironically, mortgage interest rates actually went up after this announcement, because I don't know if Lennar knows this, but there's a complete difference between the Fed funds rate, the overnight borrowing rate for banks, and mortgage interest rates. They're completely different. And each time, the last two times the Fed has reduced rates, mortgage interest rates have actually gone up. So it says, don't wait. Contact us today to learn more about great rates Lennar Mortgage is offering, right? Because they are pitching, we will buy down your interest rate. We want you to buy at a crazy high price, and then we'll buy down your interest rate so you can afford to make the payment. The problem is with this, if you are a buyer looking to buy one of these properties, you are now locked into that property long term, because when you go to sell, nobody cares about the prior rate that you have. They're going to have to get a new rate to purchase their property. Okay, so this is the issue with date the rate, marry the house type of language. It doesn't work. And this attitude of this is the best time to buy, home prices may rise fast, couldn't be further than the truth. Let's dig into why that is. And here's an email we just got the other day, blasted out by a sales rep on the ground. And what's funny is Lennar originally tried to remove real estate agents from the transaction. Just a few years ago, they said, we don't need you anymore. We're actually not even going to pay you anything if you bring a customer to one of our products. Now it's 6-7%. This is crazy. Here's why Lennar is an excellent option for your clients. Up to 6% commission coming in October. If you sell in October, 7% for closing costs, October closings in select communities. This is wild. They're also offering appliances and blinds, minus the washer and dryer. They're basically saying, look, we're going to give you all of these special benefits to try to close out our books as fast as possible. A lot of this is because their books close in October. A lot of the builders, they close October 31st. So they need to show the sales. And this is actually one of the best times to purchase new construction. But ultimately, if you're getting the rate buy down, trust me, you want a lower price. You need to negotiate both lower prices and the rate buy down. If you're going to do this, you need to be very careful, because we will go into the data, but a lot of these loans are already underwater around the South because prices are starting to fall. The reason they're starting to fall is because there's more active listings on the market than ever. Look at this chart. This comes from Macro Edge Research. Active listings are the highest for sale on record. You can see that we had this massive dip in Florida, and now it's just started to skyrocket upwards ever since the Fed started raising its interest rates. And look at this. This is for new homes stacking up. Despite the incentives that they're offering, the crazy 22% incentives and price decreases, new homes for sale in the U.S. South region are worse than the great financial crisis. Okay, so builders are absolutely in a crisis. And I know a lot of people say, well, Warren Buffett's investing in builders and blah, blah, blah. No, no, no. It was his underlings. This was an under $1 billion investment threshold that they made into builders, and they were focused on the build to rent process for that. And by the way, they also bought United Healthcare at 411, okay? And it went down to basically like 260. These people who are coming behind Buffett do not have a good track record, and that's part of the reason why Berkshire is starting to sell off. People are starting to recognize maybe they don't have the savvy that Munger and Buffett now have. But ultimately, look at this. This chart is mind-boggling. This is already, we are not in a crisis period, but we're seeing a crisis for new construction and builders right now with these new home sales starting to go up. And of course, naturally, when you have the new construction inventory spike and you have the existing home inventory spike, you see prices come down. It's all about supply and demand. So we right now we're seeing a massive supply spike and demand is coming down as well because migration is slowing down and the locals are completely priced out. This is leading to real home prices to start falling. This is across the United States, this chart, but the reality is in Florida, it is much worse. It's down about 4% year over year. It's actually a lot worse than that in many areas. There's certain hot spots that don't have a ton of new construction around it that are doing just fine, that have some sort of compensating factor. But if the new construction areas, which is mostly a ton of areas of Florida, they just continue to build. And there's even more apartments in new construction communities coming online because once they start construction, it takes them 2 to 3 years to finish that community. So construction that started in 23, 24, 25, those have to be finished and they're being added to the supply every single month. And frankly, a lot of the builders are freaking out and they're selling them to build to rent hedge funds. But here's a really cool chart that just came out that shows the most distressed properties for FHA loans are originated by these companies. Okay, this comes from John Comiskey, and he did this awesome analysis on FHA, right? The number of FHA loans they originated, the percentage of FHA loans that they originated, their average interest rate, and the average rate spread. So this is how much they're buying down the rate, right? They're buying down the rate 0.7%, and oftentimes a lot more than that. Underwater FHAs already that have been originated, this is crazy. 27% of them are already underwater. Why? Because FHA, you only have to put 3.5% down. You also have tons of closing costs. So the amount of money you put into the property, I mean, it comes right down. Just like we saw 22% decrease in new construction incentives. If you bought, then you're, 22% minus 3.5%. You're not in a good spot on your property. You're underwater if you bought during those peak years. And this is really terrifying. And this is where we're seeing a lot of the distress in the market. Really interesting and great analysis. You should check out his Substack and follow him on X. He's got great data analysis. And this comes from him as well. This is where in Florida, we're seeing the distress for FHA, which we believe is the new subprime. You can see it's in basically South Side, new construction in St. John's. You're seeing South Orlando, areas that they have had a ton of new construction and sold at these peak prices over the last couple of years. They're now underwater, and this is where we're going to start seeing the distress. Okay, does that make sense? That is where the distress is. It's not going to be in homes that were purchased pre-2020. It's going to be in the last couple of years where a little bit of money was put down. The consumer was on the edge. Maybe that consumer is losing their job, but this has massive effects. I mean, each year there's 4 to 6 million properties being sold around the country at peak prices, and now prices are starting to come down. And the problem is the consumer is not catching up. The consumer situation is actually getting a lot worse. This is the increase in the last 4 years. This is regular inflation. 40 years is 200%, the overall CPI. And this comes from creative planning. But things like college for the next generation of home buyers that'll be able to purchase is up 695%. This doesn't even make any sense unless education has become that much more powerful for you to get an incredible job that increases your income by that amount. This does not make sense. So the next generation is loaded up with these student loans. They're loaded up with car loans that are just insane. I see some people basically have a mortgage payment for their car. Of course, it's their decision to do that. I don't recommend doing that. I was driving a 1999 Toyota Camry for a long period of time, worth less than $2,000 while I was saving my money to buy real estate. And then credit card debt as well is plaguing the next generation of buyers. It gets worse every single month that comes out. And this is a great chart that came out from Economic Policy Institute. There's a disconnect between productivity and a typical worker's compensation. So it used to be fairly correlated with, how productive somebody is with how much they get on an hourly compensation. Basically, back in the 1970s, that switched, and hourly compensation has basically remained not very good while productivity continues to skyrocket. People basically are doing 2 or 3 jobs. They're using technology, all this type of stuff. But the worker Obviously, they make an income coming in. They have to use that money for a payment to purchase a house and service all the debt that they have. They can't afford to buy houses at these prices and at these rates. So the consumer wages are falling behind and the gains are going to companies versus the consumers, and that's going to push back the entire market. The gains in the stock market are just insane. This is a chart from the Board of Governors, Federal Reserve System. You can just see that the net worth held by the top 1% is skyrocketing. The bottom 50% is falling behind. This is another way to look at it. Here's the stock market. Obviously, this is correlated. There's 7 companies that are just absolutely driving the entire market. That's called the Mag 7. You can look that up, ChatGPT it. The remaining 493 stocks are basically stagnant. So there's just a couple of companies that have massive growth from the AI and technology standpoint, and the rest of them are really stagnating. So this is what's happening is these top 1% folks are owning stocks, and their stocks are going through the roof. The stocks are at an insane valuation right now that we've basically never seen before. This is from the Buffett indicator ratio. You should look this up and see how this is calculated, but it's one of the best ratios out there, and basically is why Buffett is sitting on the sideline with so much cash. He's saying that the valuations of a lot of these companies are just completely out of whack. It's not a good time to be in the market right now from a valuation standpoint. And look at this. Lower and middle class folks are getting left behind. After-tax wages and salaries by household income changed from a year earlier. You can see that the lower wage folks are going down in how much they're earning. The higher wage folks are going up, and the middle is kind of going slightly down. But again, more of the gains are going to the top, and we're starting to see this divide widen very rapidly within a short period of time. And again, the consumer has so much debt. This is revolving consumer credit, owed and securitized. This is U.S. consumers have never been this in debt before, and we are in the middle of a debt crisis. So when you're thinking about these builders and they're trying to qualify people to buy these houses, these overpriced houses, and give you an incentive to buy down their rate, they understand you're already on a payment schedule for everything else you own in your life for the majority of consumers. That's why they're trying to get the payment down. They'd rather get your payment down by buying down your interest rate than reducing the price of the home, because it's way more profitable for them to do so. And they understand the fact that the consumer is strapped. So credit card delinquencies are continuing to tick higher for the consumer. We're almost at the great financial crisis level. And the spending is the majority of the spending, or 49% of it, is coming from the top 10% of those wealthy households. We saw those stock portfolios just continue to crush it every single day. The stock market has come up like 36% since the bottom of the tariff situation just a couple of months ago in March. And the middle class just doesn't matter as much anymore, because the wealthy are the ones that are spending. And basically, the wealthy don't buy Lennar homes, right? They're first generation homes usually, right? They're starter homes that they're generally building. So this is a disconnect. They're not selling to the right customer. And look at this. This is crazy. We're starting to see this across the board. There's an HVAC slowdown. So HVAC giant Carrier's CEO said he expects Q3 sales to be down 40% year over year. This is the lowest volume in more than a decade. I can tell you, I talked to people on the ground here, another salesperson that says he can't even get people to qualify for HVACs to buy a $5,000-$6,000 HVAC unit for financing. So they're getting denied. So what they do is they go to Home Depot and they buy a window unit versus buying a new Carrier unit. And now all these HVAC companies are really struggling. So this is real. The real economy is completely disconnected from Wall Street. And the administration just seems to continue to want to pump assets as high as humanly possible. But the problem is the majority of people don't own assets and they're being left behind. We were also told that manufacturing would be coming back to the United States. That is not the case that we're seeing right now. The U.S. economy actually shed 12,000 manufacturing jobs in August, the second largest drop since October 2024. That's the 4th consecutive monthly decline, which is a big red flag. So we're starting to see more manufacturing into basically a recession at this point. Hopefully this picks up in the future, but we'll see. I mean, hopefully the tariffs push people to start building more in the United States, but that can take 2, 3, 4, or 5 years to get that manufacturing back here, and it's going to be pain in the meantime. And frankly, the tech hubs could be in trouble too with this new $100,000 fee for the H-1B visas. It was supposed to be annual, then it flip-flopped, and now it's just for new people coming in. And this could hurt the tech hubs, right? If there's not a lot of people relocating to the United States, they're not going to be buying in these tech hubs, and if people have to leave the US or their visa's up and that they need to renew, and this does apply in the future, then obviously that would impact housing significantly in these tech hubs, where these people from outside the United States are coming, India, China, Philippines, all that type of stuff, people who are relocating here, even from Europe. They would have a big issue being able to stay here, and the companies would likely hire more Americans, which is great for the United States, but it's definitely going to impact the housing market. And look, this is another thing that's slowing the housing market, is because we had such low rates for such a long period of time. People are staying in their homes for longer, and this is a lock-in effect. So, right, if everybody can, refinance their rate to 2 to 3% in a short period of time, why would they leave their house if they're going to have to pay a higher payment to a different house and probably get less quality? So the reality is that we could have a lock-in effect where we're going to have lower number of sales, lower volume moving forward across the United States for years to come because of this lock-in effect. About 80% of people are below that 6% rate at this point in time. And we're already at the worst affordability level since the great financial crisis when we're looking at a home price to median household income ratio. So we are absolutely in a bubble. We're in a worse bubble on a ratio standpoint than we were since the great financial crisis. And it continues to get worse, every single month. We are hoping for a big pullback in mortgage rates. That's not going to be enough. Prices need to come down. And the reality is, too, why would you buy if you could rent, and it's way cheaper to rent than it is to buy? This comes from Goldman Sachs Global Investment Research. You can see it's a lot cheaper. In a lot of cases, $700, $800, $900 cheaper to rent every single month than it would to pay a monthly mortgage payment. Plus, you have the cost of doing the repairs. You have to worry about insurance and taxes, liability of owning your property as well versus just being a renter. There's definitely benefits to home ownership for sure. But at this point, it does not make sense to purchase. We're telling homeowners right now, if you are buying, you need to stay in your house a very long time, and hope that the market comes back long term. Otherwise, in a lot of cases, it makes more sense to rent and wait to purchase at this point in time. And that's going to slow the market down. Because look at this. This is the record low home buyer demand, and we're at great financial crisis levels of existing home sales already. So demand is slowing. The affordability crisis is getting worse. It's showing up in the builders. They're slapping massive incentives on to try to get people to come out. They're doing it to the consumer. Now they're throwing it at real estate agents to just get people in the door to buy these overpriced starter homes. And ultimately, the only thing that can really save us is housing affordability. Housing affordability is what determines sales volume. So if we want to get back to a more healthy economy, we need prices to come down. There might be a little bit of interest rates coming down. We need taxes and insurance to come down. Every input in the housing, we need to get it cheaper and get that payment as a lower percentage of income. Look at this, 40% of the mortgage payment to income ratio. Okay. How can people afford to save anything? The next generation is totally screwed when you're looking at this chart. I mean, if you have to put 40 cents of every dollar that you make into just your shelter costs, not including what you have to pay for taxes, groceries, insurance, even utilities, it's really slowing the number of sales. And that's why you saw this spike. And then right after that, you see the number of sales in orange there just drop off. And existing homeowners are doing okay because they got the lower rates already, but the new mortgage, look at the differential here. It's about $800, $900 difference that the new people are spending per month than it is versus people who already had an existing mortgage. And for Florida specifically, we're in a full-fledged buyer market. I know a lot of agents are just denying this is the case. The reality that is that the pendulum is swinging and it's speeding up, and it's going to get a lot worse in the next couple months here. Going into the end of the year, we're also going to start seeing seasonality. So I think Florida specifically is going to get really hurt. Texas is going to get hurt. Obviously, Austin is one of the worst spots. They're down over 20% in their price already. In Jacksonville, depending on where you are, you're down about 10 to 15% already from the peak. Expect us to go down another 20% over the next few years here, which is pretty traumatic if you bought at the peak already. And this is just to reevaluate. Basically, FHA is the next subprime. So we started off with those charts. I think it's really important to understand that a lot of those new construction communities are going to have distress in them. We get calls every single day saying, I'm underwater, I can't sell, I need to rent out my house. We do the analysis on the rental. They're underwater $500, $600, $700 a month. plus they have to pay the property manager on top of that, and they can't do that. So now they're looking to short sale. Well, if you have a ton of short sales in a new construction community, that's going to depress the entire community. And we think this is going to start with those FHA loans. So love to hear from you. Do you see new construction struggling in your area? Are you seeing a lot of for sale signs in your area? What incentives are you seeing? What crazy incentives are you seeing, not just to the consumer, but to the agents to bring buyers to these new construction community? And what do you think happens next? We have our predictions, and we'll continue to put them out there based on the data that we are seeing every single week we're staying on top of. And if you want to stay on top of the information, follow along with us. Go to our description below and you can subscribe to the Substack. I talk about things on there that I can't talk about on YouTube, and you can get an update twice per week of what's going on in the real estate market real time with the most interesting charts every single week. Thanks for following as always, and we'll talk to you soon.